My name is Alara Monroe, and before I ever fell in love, before I ever wore white, before I ever stood at an altar alone, there was my Aunt Maribel. If you've ever been wounded by someone who smiles while doing it, comment your story below. Share this video if family betrayal has ever cut deeper than an enemy's blade, and watch until the end, because the moment everyone waited for wasn't the one they expected. Maribel had been part of my life for as long as I could remember, which meant she'd been quietly dismantling me for just as long. She was my mother's older sister, the kind of woman everyone listened to without questioning why. She spoke softly, but her words always landed sharp. She dressed impeccably, carried herself like authority, and never raised her voice, because she didn't need to. The damage was always done with precision. Growing up, I learned early that there were two versions of Maribel, the one the family adored, and the one I got alone. At birthdays, she'd smile and say, "Alara's always been sensitive." At holidays, it was, "She means well, she just doesn't follow through." At school events, "She's creative, but creativity doesn't pay bills." Everyone laughed. I learned to swallow. When I was 12, she told my cousin, right in front of me, that I was too dramatic to succeed at anything serious. When I was 16, she warned my mother that I'd drive myself into disappointment if I kept dreaming. When I was 22 and moved out on my own, she shook her head and said, "Some girls just aren't built for stability." She never said it angrily. That's what made it worse. She said it like a diagnosis, like a fact, and the family treated it as truth. I wasn't rebellious. I wasn't wild. I didn't ruin things. I studied. I worked. I paid my own way. But none of that mattered because Maribel had already written my story, and everyone else was reading from her script. The first time I realized she enjoyed it was at a family dinner when I was 27. I had just landed a job I was proud of. Not glamorous, not flashy, but mine. I shared the news, nervous but hopeful. Maribel smiled, tilted her head, took a sip of wine. "Well," she said, "let's see how long this one lasts." The table went quiet. Someone chuckled awkwardly. No one defended me. I excused myself to the bathroom and stared at my reflection, hands shaking, wondering why I kept showing up to rooms where I was already decided. But the worst part wasn't what she said to me. It was what she said about me when she thought I couldn't hear. I learned that later, from cousins, from side conversations that stopped when I walked in, from looks exchanged over my shoulder. She means well, but Alara's always been difficult. She doesn't know how to keep people. She burns bridges without realizing it. By the time I met Daniel, my fiancé, I already knew my place in the family hierarchy. I was the liability. Daniel came into my life quietly. No grand gestures, no fireworks, just consistency. He listened when I spoke. He noticed when I went quiet. He didn't try to fix me, because he never saw me as broken. The first time I brought him to a family gathering, I watched Maribel before I watched anyone else. Her eyes lingered on him too long. She asked him questions she'd never asked any man I'd dated before. About his job, his goals, his plans. She laughed a little too warmly at his answers, touched his arm when she spoke. And then she looked at me. Not with anger, not with contempt, with calculation. That night, as we drove home, Daniel said, "Your aunt is intense." I laughed it off. "You get used to her." But deep down, something tightened. Because I knew Maribel didn't hate me because I failed. She hated me because I didn't. And the moment love entered my life, real love, steady love, she decided it didn't belong to me. That was the beginning. And I didn't fight her. Not yet. Daniel didn't fall in love with me loudly. He didn't announce it, didn't post it, didn't make a performance out of it. He just stayed. And for someone like me, someone who had spent her entire life being told she was too much, too unstable, too unreliable, that kind of quiet devotion felt dangerous because Maribel noticed it immediately. At the second family gathering Daniel attended, she changed tactics. She didn't look at me when she spoke anymore. She spoke through me, around me, past me. Her sentences were careful now, layered with concern instead of judgment. "So, Daniel," she said, smiling as she cut into her food, "how do you handle conflict?" He looked up, surprised. "I talk things through." She nodded thoughtfully. "That's good. Very good. Communication is important, especially with someone who feels deeply." Her eyes flicked toward me for half a second. I smiled. I always smiled. Daniel squeezed my hand under the table. I could feel the tension in his grip. He wasn't imagining it. From that point on, Maribel made herself available to him in ways that felt deliberate. She called him by his full name, asked about his career progress, complimented his ambition, framed herself as a guide, a voice of wisdom. "She's protective," my mother said once when I mentioned it. "She just wants what's best for you." But Maribel didn't want what was best for me. She wanted what was best for him, without me in the picture. It started subtly, always subtly. "She's independent, which is admirable," Maribel told him once when she thought I was out of earshot. "But independence can turn into isolation if you're not careful." Another time, at a family barbecue, she pulled him aside to show him old photo albums. Pictures of me as a child, mid-cry, mid-tantrum, mid-failure. "She's always been emotional," Maribel said softly. "We worried about her. Growing up." I found them in the living room, his posture stiff, her voice low and intimate. When I asked what they were talking about, Maribel smiled brightly. "Just reminiscing." Daniel didn't meet my eyes. That night, in bed, he asked, "Were you unhappy as a kid?" I stared at the ceiling, the question landing heavier than it should have. "No," I said. I was misunderstood. He nodded, but the pause afterward told me something had shifted. Maribel knew how to plant doubts without making them sound like accusations. She never attacked me directly. She framed everything as concern for him. "She's passionate. Passionate people can be volatile. She's strong-willed. That can be exhausting long-term. She's been through a lot. Trauma has a way of repeating itself." Each sentence sounded reasonable, caring even. And Daniel, who believed people were mostly good, listened. I noticed the changes in him before he ever admitted them. The way he hesitated before agreeing with me. The way he asked questions that felt like evaluations. "Do you think you overreact sometimes? Why do you shut down when you're upset? Have you ever considered therapy?" They weren't insults. They were inspections. And every time, Maribel was nearby, watching, listening, collecting. The worst part wasn't that she spoke to him. It was that she waited until I wasn't there. I found out the truth by accident. One evening, months later, I arrived early to a family dinner. I heard voices in the kitchen, hers and his. I stopped short in the hallway, unseen. "She'll ruin your life," Maribel said calmly. No hesitation, no sugarcoating. "Just like she ruins everything." My chest tightened so fast I thought I might make a sound. Daniel didn't respond right away. Maribel continued, her tone almost gentle. "I've watched her whole life. She burns bridges. She doesn't mean to, but she does. And you have so much potential." There it was. The story she'd been telling about me for decades, finally handed to the man I loved. When I stepped into the kitchen, the conversation stopped. Maribel turned first. "Ilara," she said warmly. "You're early." Daniel looked like he'd been caught in a storm without shelter. I smiled. I always smiled. "Traffic was light," I said. Maribel patted his arm. "We were just talking about wedding timelines." That night, Daniel didn't touch me. He said he was tired, said work had been stressful, said nothing was wrong. I lay awake beside him, staring into the dark, replaying her words again and again. "She'll ruin your life." I didn't confront her. I didn't ask him what he believed. I stayed quiet, because Maribel had mistaken my silence before, and she was about to do it again. Silence does strange things to people who expect resistance. Maribel grew bolder after that night. Not louder, never louder, but more confident. She walked through rooms like someone who believed the ending was already written, like she'd done her part, and now all that remained was to watch the consequences unfold. And I let her. Daniel didn't pull away from me completely. That would have been easier to fight. Instead, he hovered in a state of half-doubt, half-faith. He loved me, but love, once questioned, doesn't move the same way. It hesitates. It double-checks. It asks permission. Our conversations changed. "Your aunt worries about you," he said one evening, carefully, like he was stepping across thin ice. I didn't look up from the sink. She always has. "She says you've been under a lot of pressure lately." I turned off the water, dried my hands. "Do you think that?" He paused. Too long. "I think," he said slowly, "that sometimes you carry things alone when you don't have to." It wasn't an accusation, it was worse. It was doubt wearing concern like a disguise. Maribel had done exactly what she intended to do. She'd positioned herself as the reasonable voice in the room, and me as the unpredictable variable. I didn't defend myself. Not because I couldn't, but because I was tired of explaining who I was to people who preferred the version of me that justified their distance. Wedding planning should have been joyful. Instead, it felt like walking through enemy territory in a white dress. Maribel volunteered for everything. She had opinions about the venue, the guest list, the seating, the vows, the music. She framed each suggestion as help, each criticism as practicality. "Traditionally, the bride's family handles this," she said, smiling. "You don't want something too unconventional." "People will talk." People always did. She insisted on being involved in meetings I never invited her to. She spoke over me with polished ease. When vendors looked confused, she laughed lightly and said, "Ilara gets overwhelmed sometimes. I'll explain." Daniel didn't stop her. That hurt more than her words ever could. One afternoon, I found my mother and Maribel in the living room, whispering over guest lists. My name was circled in red ink beside several crossed-out traditions. "She doesn't need to walk alone," Maribel was saying. "It sends the wrong message." I stood in the doorway. "What message is that?" They both turned. "Oh," my mother said, startled. "We didn't hear you." Maribel smiled, unbothered. "Just discussing logistics." "I'll handle my own wedding," I said. Maribel tilted her head. "Of course you will. We're just trying to prevent regret." Regret. Her favorite word. Later that night, Daniel asked me, "Do you really want to exclude family from the ceremony?" "I'm not excluding anyone," I said. "I'm choosing myself." He frowned slightly. "That sounds defensive." That was the moment I realized how deeply her narrative had settled into him. Anything I did to protect myself looked like instability. Anything she did to undermine me looked like love. So I stopped reacting. I let her plan. Let her whisper. Let her assume. I made my decisions quietly, alone. I didn't announce them. I didn't argue for them. I simply wrote them down and locked them away. The dress fitting was the first time I felt it. The shift. The consultant asked who would be walking me down the aisle. My mother answered automatically. Her father. My father had died years earlier. The room went silent. Maribel cleared her throat. She meant symbolically. I met my reflection in the mirror, pale, steady. I haven't decided yet, I said. Maribel laughed lightly. Oh, Ilara, you don't have to be dramatic. I didn't respond. Because the truth was, I had decided. And the more they underestimated me, the easier it became. Maribel thought silence meant surrender. Daniel thought it meant uncertainty. My family thought it meant compliance. None of them realized I was preparing for the only moment that mattered. Not the vows, not the kiss, not the celebration, but the question that would come before all of it. And when it did, I wouldn't say a word. The morning of my wedding arrived without softness. No nerves, no fluttering excitement. Just clarity, sharp and unforgiving. I woke before dawn, the sky still dark, my phone silent. No messages from family, no check-ins, no reassurance. I took that as confirmation, not disappointment. The hotel room smelled like pressed fabric and expensive flowers. My dress hung by the window, motionless, waiting. I stood in front of it longer than I should have, not imagining myself walking toward love, but toward impact. This was not a beginning. It was a reckoning. Maribel arrived early, of course. She always did. She swept into the bridal suite like she owned the air, heels clicking with purpose, lips already curved into that practiced smile. There she is, she said. The bride. I nodded. Good morning. She looked me over. You look composed? There was something probing in her tone, like she'd expected cracks, tears, weakness. I feel fine, I said. She watched me carefully, then turned to the makeup artist. Nothing too heavy. Ilara doesn't need drama on her face. I caught my own reflection, eyes steady, jaw set. Drama had already happened. Today was just the reveal. My mother fluttered around the room, wringing her hands, nervous energy spilling everywhere. She kept adjusting things that didn't need adjusting. Are you okay? She asked for the third time. Yes. Are you sure? Yes. Maribel leaned in. She's always been self-contained. It's her way. There it was again. The translation of my control into something clinical. By the time the ceremony approached, the room was full of people who knew me only through Maribel's interpretation. They smiled politely, spoke cautiously, like I might shatter. I didn't. When Daniel arrived for the pre-ceremony photos, his expression stopped him mid-step. You look incredible, he said. I studied his face, the tension around his mouth, the questions he didn't ask. Thank you. He hesitated. Are you okay? I met his eyes. I'm exactly where I need to be. He nodded, uncertain. Maribel watched from across the room, arms crossed, satisfied. She believed I was holding it together for him. She had no idea. The venue was filled by the time the music started. Guests whispered, chairs shifted. Anticipation buzzed like electricity under skin. Maribel sat in the front row, perfectly centered. My mother beside her. Daniel at the altar. Everyone in their assigned places. Except me. I stood behind the doors, bouquet heavy in my hands, fabric pooling at my feet. The coordinator whispered instructions, counting beats, ready to cue my entrance. Your father will meet you halfway, she said automatically. I shook my head. She blinked. Oh, your mother then? No. Confusion crossed her face. Who's giving you away? I looked at the closed doors, at the life waiting on the other side, at the people who believed they knew me. No one, I said. She hesitated. Is that final? Yes. The doors began to open. The music swelled. I stepped forward alone. A ripple moved through the crowd before I even reached the aisle. Heads turned, whispers bloomed. Maribel's smile froze. Just for a second. Long enough for me to see it. I didn't look at her. I walked. Each step felt deliberate, heavy, earned. This was not defiance. It was declaration. I reached the altar. The music faded. The officiant cleared his throat, flipping through his notes. He glanced between me and Daniel, confused. Then he spoke the words everyone had been waiting for. "Who gives this woman away?" The silence that followed was absolute, and I stood there, alone, unflinching, ready for what came next. No one answered. Not my mother, not Maribel. Not a single voice in that room dared to fill the space. The silence stretched so long it stopped feeling awkward and started feeling dangerous, like something fragile had finally snapped. I could hear my own breathing, slow, measured. I kept my eyes forward, hands steady around the bouquet, spine straight. I didn't look back because I didn't need to. I already knew what I'd see. Confusion, discomfort, fear. The officiant shifted, clearing his throat again. He glanced toward the front row, then back at me. "We can take a moment," he offered gently. "No," I said. My voice cut through the room sharper than I expected. Not loud, certain. "I walk here by myself." A murmur rippled through the guests like wind across water. Someone gasped. A chair scraped softly against the floor. I felt Daniel turn toward me fully now, his face unreadable. I finally looked at Maribel. For the first time that day, she wasn't in control. Her mouth was slightly open, smile gone, eyes calculating at a speed that betrayed her. She hadn't planned for this. She hadn't rehearsed a response. This wasn't a conversation she could steer. My mother whispered her name, urgent. "Elara." I didn't answer. The officiant nodded slowly. "Very well." And just like that, the ceremony continued. But the room was different now. The air had shifted. Everyone was paying attention in a way they hadn't before. Not to tradition, not to appearances, but to me. Daniel leaned in slightly. "You didn't tell me." "I know," I said quietly. "Why?" I met his eyes. Because this wasn't about asking permission. His breath hitched. Not in anger, in realization. As we exchanged vows, I felt every word land heavier than it should have, not because of love, but because of context. Because every promise existed in the shadow of what had just happened. When Daniel said, "I choose you," I searched his face for doubt. There was fear, confusion, but also something else. Respect. The kiss came. Applause followed, hesitant at first, then louder. Polite. Uneasy. At the reception, the questions circled like vultures. Was that planned? Is everything okay? That was unconventional. Maribel cornered me near the bar, her composure stitched back together with effort. "You embarrassed your family," she said under her breath. I took a sip of champagne. I honored myself. She laughed sharply. "You think that's strength? Public defiance?" "No," I said. "I think strength is not pretending anymore." Her jaw tightened. "You've always had a flair for dramatics." I leaned closer. "And you've always mistaken silence for permission." For the first time, she had no response. Daniel found me minutes later, pulling me aside. "Did she really say that to me?" he asked quietly. I didn't ask what he meant. I already knew. "Yes," he swallowed. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I needed to see what you'd do with it." He exhaled slowly. "I should have trusted you." "Yes," I said. "You should have." The words hung between us. Not accusatory, just true. Across the room, Maribel watched us. Alone now. Unincluded. Unconsulted. She had tried to give my life away without my consent, so I took it back, in front of everyone. And that was only the beginning. The reception thinned faster than anyone expected. Laughter sounded forced. Conversations kept stalling mid-sentence. The moment had followed us into every corner of the room, settling into shoulders, tightening jaws. People smiled at me differently now, not with pity, not with judgment, but with uncertainty, as if they were recalculating everything they thought they knew. Maribel stayed longer than she should have. She hovered near clusters of relatives, laughing too loudly, touching arms, leaning in close. Damage control. I recognized it immediately. She was reasserting the version of reality where she was still the authority. I didn't interrupt her. Daniel and I sat together at a small table near the edge of the room. He barely touched his food. I didn't either. "I need to ask you something," he said finally. "Then ask." He looked down at his hands. "When she talked to me, before the wedding, did you know?" "Yes." His head snapped up. "And you still married me?" I met his gaze. I married the man who would choose what he believed over what he was told. He nodded slowly. "I didn't handle it well." "No," I said. "You didn't." There was no anger in my voice, just clarity. I wasn't interested in softening the truth anymore. He leaned back, exhaling. "She said you push people away, that you create distance when things get hard. And what did you think?" "I thought—" He hesitated. "I thought she sounded like someone who knew you longer than I did." That hurt. He didn't deny it. He didn't justify it. He named it. "I watched you instead," he continued. "And the things she said didn't match the woman standing in front of me. But I was afraid of being wrong." I nodded. "So was I." Across the room, Maribel finally approached. "Ilara," she said brightly. "There you are." Daniel stiffened beside me. Maribel looked between us. "Everything all right?" Daniel stood before I could answer. "You told me she'd ruin my life." Maribel blinked once, recovered instantly. I was concerned. "That's not the same thing." "You told me she ruins everything," he said. Her smile thinned. "I was trying to protect you." "From what?" I asked. She turned to me, eyes hard now. "From yourself." The words landed with finality. No disguise left. Daniel shook his head. "You didn't protect me. You confused me." Maribel's voice sharpened. "You don't understand our family dynamics." "I understand manipulation," he said. "And I understand now why she didn't bring it to me. You wanted control." People nearby had gone quiet. Heads turned. Conversations died. Maribel sensed it. Her composure cracked. "You're turning everyone against me," she snapped at me. I stood. "No, you did that yourself," she scoffed. "You always needed to be the victim." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "And you always needed me to be one." She stared at me, stunned. Not by anger, but by recognition. The truth had surfaced without spectacle, without shouting. Just exposure. Daniel took my hand. Maribel looked at it, then at the ring. For the first time in my life, she looked small. She left shortly after. No dramatic exit. No apology. Just the absence of her presence. The room felt lighter when she was gone. Later that night, when it was just Daniel and me, he said, "I don't know what comes next." I looked out the window. The city lights blurred and distant. Neither do I. But for the first time, the silence didn't belong to her anymore. The days after the wedding were quieter than I expected. Not peaceful. Not warm. Just empty in a way that felt deliberate. Like something had been removed, rather than broken. The messages slowed. The group chats went silent. Family members chose sides without announcing it. which somehow felt more honest than confrontation ever had. Maribel never reached out. Neither did I. My mother called once. Her voice was careful, rehearsed. "Your aunt feels misunderstood." I stared at the wall while she spoke, noticing a faint crack near the ceiling I'd never paid attention to before. "I know," I said. "She's hurt." "So was I replied. My mother didn't argue. She didn't apologize either. She just changed the subject. That was how things ended in our family. Not with resolution, but with avoidance, dressed up as peace. Daniel and I returned home 2 days later. The apartment looked exactly the same. Shoes by the door. Dishes in the sink. Sunlight slanting across the floor like nothing monumental had happened. But everything had. We moved around each other carefully at first, like survivors of the same storm assessing the damage. At night, we lay awake longer than usual, backs not touching, thoughts too loud for sleep. On the third night, he finally said it. "I should have shut her down." "Yes," I said. "I should have told you immediately." "Yes." He turned to face me. "Do you regret marrying me?" I didn't answer right away. "No," I said finally. "But I would have regretted marrying someone who needed her approval more than my truth." He nodded, swallowing hard. "I don't want her in our lives." "I know." We didn't say her name again after that. Weeks passed. Invitations stopped coming. Holidays were quietly reorganized. I was no longer asked to explain myself, because no one wanted the explanation. They wanted the old balance back. The version where I absorbed discomfort so everyone else could stay comfortable. I didn't offer that anymore. One afternoon, I ran into Maribel at a grocery store across town. She looked surprised to see me, like she hadn't considered the possibility that I would continue existing beyond her influence. She opened her mouth. I walked past her. No anger, no satisfaction, just certainty. That night, I stood in front of the mirror and studied my reflection. Not for flaws, not for cracks, but for ownership. For the first time, the woman staring back at me wasn't bracing for impact. She was standing in the aftermath. Maribel once said I'd ruin everything. What she never understood was this: I didn't ruin my life. I refused to let anyone else write it, and the woman who tried to give my future away lost her place in it the moment I chose myself.